lesson is for grade 10 ELA. It will guide and support you through lesson 1 for the week of April 27th. Today, you will analyze how an author develops an argument through evidence and reasoning in order to compose a draft of an argument analysis essay. Take a minute to think about the arguments you have read this unit. What makes an effective argument? In your thinking about what makes an argument effective, you may have come up with some of the following points: a clear and concise claim, evidence and reasoning to connect ideas and support the claim, use of rhetorical techniques to help build and strengthen the argument, and an awareness of the audience. So using our understanding of effective arguments, we are now going to apply that to a text. We will read the first 2 paragraphs of an essay adapted from Dana Gioia's Why Literature Matters. As we read, we will analyze how the author uses evidence, such as facts or examples, to support claims, and reasoning to develop ideas and to connect claims and evidence. I will read these first 2 paragraphs aloud as you follow along. Feel free to annotate on your own paper where you notice the way that the author introduces and develops his argument. A strange thing has happened in the American arts during the past quarter century. While income rose to unforeseen levels, college attendance ballooned, and access to information increased enormously, the interest young Americans showed in the arts, and especially literature, actually diminished. According to the 2002 survey of public participation in the arts, a population study designed and commissioned by the National Endowment for the Arts and executed by the U.S. Bureau of the Census, arts participation by Americans has declined for 8 of the 9 major forms that are measured. The declines have been most severe among younger adults, ages 18 to 24. The most worrisome finding in the 2002 study, however, is the declining percentage of Americans, especially young adults, reading literature. So as you were reading along and annotating, you may have noticed that in paragraph 1, the author introduces his argument by contrasting increasingly positive changes in America with a decline in the interest in the arts. So he mentions the income levels rising, college attendance ballooning, and access to information increasing, but contrasts those positive changes with the phrase "a strange thing" in the very beginning of the paragraph, and then discussing how the interest young Americans are showing in the arts is diminishing towards the end of the paragraph. As we move on to paragraph 2, the author then uses facts from the compelling poll, the survey of the public participation in the arts, to support his statement in paragraph 1 that interest in the arts is diminishing. And finally, he closes paragraph 2 by emphasizing this claim about this being a major problem with potentially negative consequences by calling it a worrisome finding and restating the claim that interest is diminishing. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to read the remainder of the text from the essay Why Literature Matters. And as you read, remember to annotate and analyze for how the author is using evidence such as facts or examples to support claims, and reasoning to develop ideas and to connect claims and evidence. I'm going to give you about 6 minutes for this reading. If you find that you need more time to read, follow along with the rest of the lesson, getting through as much of the text as you can, and coming back to the text to finish it or read more closely after this lesson segment is over. You may begin. At this time, we're going to move on to discuss your analysis of the text. If you have not finished reading, you can return to the text to finish when we are done with this lesson segment. So I'd like you to review your annotations. As you review, consider the following prompt. How does Dana Gioia build an argument to persuade his audience that the decline of reading in America will have a negative effect on society? So review your notes and think about the ways that he builds this persuasive argument. You may have noticed that he uses evidence from a variety of well-respected sources to build ethos or credibility for his argument. You may have also noticed that he utilizes emotional language to build pathos and create worry in his audience about the negative effects of a less informed US population due to the decline in reading. Now you're going to draft a thesis statement. Your thesis will be in response to this prompt. How does Dana Gioia build an argument to persuade his audience that the decline of reading in America will have a negative effect on society? I'll give you a minute to draft out that thesis statement. Remember that this statement is just a draft of your thesis. You are free to come back and revise and improve it as you return to the text and deepen your understanding and analysis. Once you've drafted a thesis statement that you're comfortable with, you're going to then draft an essay in which you explain how Dana Gioia builds an argument to persuade his audience that the decline of reading in America will have a negative effect on society. In your essay, analyze how Gioia uses evidence to support claims and reasoning, to develop his ideas, and to connect claims and evidence to strengthen the persuasiveness of his argument. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with Gioia's claims, but rather explain how Gioia builds an argument to persuade his audience. Remember to include relevant textual evidence in your response.
Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 for the week of April 27th. I'm glad you were able to join us today. My name is Rachel Goisevich, and I'm so happy to be here with you. You might find it helpful, if it is possible, for you to have a piece of paper, a pen, or a computer to record your thoughts. If you don't have access to somewhere to record your thoughts, no worries. Please just listen in today. In this lesson, we have 2 learning objectives. By the end, you will be able to draw conclusions by synthesizing readings and other knowledge, and you will compose a first draft argument. Let's begin our lesson by thinking about the term oppression. Over the course of the school year, you have learned about various cultures around the world. In this unit, we have explored the ways in which groups of people or individuals have experienced oppression by reading memoirs, novels, and/or shorter texts, both literary and informational. Let's start by reviewing the definition of oppression. Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines oppression as unjust or cruel exercise of authority or power. Take a minute to think about the text we've read in this unit, and think about how we see the topic of oppression evident in some or all of these texts. Then, think about how your knowledge of oppression has deepened or changed over the course of the unit. Our lesson today will require you to think about the text you read in this unit, so let's begin by refreshing our memories. Here are some of the texts you may have read in Unit 3. Select one of these texts and brainstorm a list, either on notebook paper or another format of your choosing, about how the topic of oppression presents itself. Think about the individuals described, the events that occur, and the ways in which we see the topic of oppression in the text. The final step of this lesson will be for you to write a first draft argument. Your first draft argument today will require you to defend, challenge, or qualify a quotation about the topic of oppression. Our video segment today will focus on taking a position and brainstorming ideas to support it. Take a minute to read the definitions of each of these terms. Now let's dig a little deeper into what these terms require you to do when writing an argument. When you defend a position, your writing will support what the author is trying to say. Your goal is to find at least 3 specific reasons that prove your defense. You will want to incorporate textual evidence, paraphrase, summarize, quote, to support your position, and then logically explain why the author's words are valid. When you challenge a position, you will think to include the reasons why you do not agree with the author. But not just in general, you'll want to find specific claims or evidence that you can challenge. You must be sure to fully explain your assertions and consider how you can provide a stronger argument than the author. And finally, when you qualify, if you choose to qualify, you will agree and disagree with the author's argument. You'll need to be sure to include specific reasons for why you agree with the argument, as well as specific reasons for what you feel should be challenged. When you defend the author's argument, you'll want to validate the author's points that make sense to you. Include evidence as support. You will then explain why it is reasonable to support these statements. When you challenge, you will argue the points in the argument that do not seem logical. You will find your evidence and then provide an explanation proving your position. For both of these, you must provide evidence and explanations. Take a minute to read the prompt that you are about to address. What is the topic about which you are writing? What does the provided quotation mean? Do you agree, disagree, or both agree and disagree with the provided quotation? Why and how will you support it? So how do we go about breaking this prompt down? Well, first we need to think about what we are being asked to defend, challenge, or qualify. In this case, we are presented with a quotation by the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel. Neither the chains of dictatorship nor the fetters of oppression can keep down the forces of freedom for long. I'll start by underlining the words from this quote that clue me into the topic and the position she is taking. I notice dictatorship, oppression, and freedom. So what is she saying about each of these topics? Well, I noticed that in reference to dictatorship, she uses the term chain. Dictatorship can be constricting, binding, not allowing individuals to express their beliefs and opinions. She uses the term fetters in connection with oppression. Now, fetters is a word that I've not heard used as commonly. In case you have not heard of this word before, the word fetters means a chain used to restrain a prisoner, usually around the ankles. And we already reviewed the term oppression, so I'm going to pause and think about the ways in which oppression restrains. When I think of fetters and oppression, it makes me think of how the oppressed may be imprisoned in the sense of not being given the same rights as others, unable to live freely. And then that brings me to forces, the forces of freedom. I ask myself, why call freedom a force? Well, by calling it a force, she gives power to freedom, giving it the ability to overcome, to rise above. So putting all of these together, I'd like you to pause and reflect on what you think Angela Merkel's position is in this statement. Now for our next step. We have broken down the quotation and determined Merkel's position. Now it's time to decide if you agree, disagree, or fall somewhere in the middle because of specific reasons. With a question like this, there is no incorrect position to take as long as you support your position through evidence and reasoning. If you agree, defend her position, why do you defend it? If you disagree or challenge her position, why do you challenge it? And if you can see both sides, what are the different sides you see and why? What specific parts do you agree with? Which ones do you disagree with? Now, I invite you to take a position. Will you defend, challenge, or qualify Merkel's statement? Now let's look at the final part of the prompt. You must support your position or your response with a clear claim and sufficient evidence. Your evidence can come from the readings in this unit, such as the text we discussed earlier, like night, in the time of the butterflies, nectar in a sieve. It can come from other studies. What does this mean exactly? Well, you might think back to Unit 1 when you read Things Fall Apart, and think this text helps support your argument. You might think about another class in a different content, such as in your history class, and use examples from that class. You can even think about your 9th grade year and recall texts like Kindred. Other studies is open to anything else you have read or learned about besides this unit. And finally, you can include personal experience to support your position. You have taken a position. Now let's brainstorm. Before you write your clear and concise thesis statement, it is helpful to begin by brainstorming your ideas. I invite you now to brainstorm ideas for your own first draft response. You may wish to create a mind map such as the one I've displayed for you, or you may wish to brainstorm in another format of your choosing, such as through a skeletal outline or just a list of your ideas. Regardless of what you choose, it is important to take some time to gather your ideas prior to writing your thesis statement and your first draft essay. Here's my initial brainstorming. I've taken a position and I've jotted down my examples. You will notice that the position I've taken is to defend the position that freedom cannot be kept down by dictatorship and oppression. I've thought of several different examples to support my position, such as the discussion about night, time of the butterflies, an example from the civil rights movement, and finally, an example about Gandhi and the liberation from oppression. Now I will develop my examples more and include that commentary that connects my examples to the position I have taken. It's your turn to brainstorm. Happy writing, and thank you for joining me for Lesson 2 for GT10 for the week of April 27th.